Hi, everyone. My name is Husain. I use they, he pronouns, and I was the program coordinator for Games for Justice this summer. Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. First of all, I wanted to start with a racial capitalism and land acknowledgement. Or racial capitalism acknowledgement. So first of all, as a program that is happening in the US, we recognize that our work is taking place in a racist, imperialist, colonialist, and capitalist system that began with the exploitation of Black people and continues to do so to this day. Also, as this program is based in the Boston area, it is operating on Massachusetts land and Pawtucket land. We recognize these peoples as the rightful stewards of the land. In addition, we've received funding from both MIT and the City of Boston, and we recognize the privilege and violence contained in both of those institutions. It is our duty to redistribute what we have received as a part of the first step of disassembling that centralized power. Cool, so that was a mouthful. But Games for Justice is a summer program for youth of color in the Boston area to participate in a collaborative, economically democratic, and transformative justice-centered game studio. So to be actionable in our acknowledgement of racial capitalism and colonialism, we hope that through this transformative justice and economic democracy framing, we can create avenues of freedom for those looking for structures that don't rely on the hierarchical capitalism and racism that we've all been socialized in. So game development is a very oppressive capitalistic field. There are so many video games that are imperialistic, racist, ableist, the list goes on. And true to form, if you create something that reflects these oppressions, when you follow the trail back to its creators, you find this monstrous industry that has its own deep history of labor rights abuse and harm towards its most marginalized workers. And yet, games as a medium has this potential for deeply impactful liberatory storytelling. Like one of the artists earlier was talking about, like the liberatory impact of play. I really like that y'all brought that up. It offers a unique way to experience narratives that game creators want to share with you. So with this hopefulness towards the liberatory potential of games, we started creating Games for Justice. I wanted to give you a quick timeline of how this kind of came about. In 2017, my youth worker journey started as a participant in the City School's Summer Leadership Program. The City School is this Boston organization working to support youth power. This program really changed the way that I understood racism and capitalism. And for Matrix fans, this was my red pill moment. Sorry, yes?
Just quickly, I know that you're trying to get through a lot of dense information, but I'm going to ask you to go a little bit slower for the captioner if you don't.
Sure, thank you for that. Yes, I apologize, my bad. All right, 2 years later, my sophomore year in college, I just worked on an economic democracy program in Brooklyn, and I realized I wanted to do something with the city school to bring this idea of democratized labor into art practice. Then that winter, I spoke with the executive director of the city school, Amatullah Mervin, and I nervously pitched this idea of a game development workshop for the youth at the city school. I remember her patiently looking at me, taking notes, and then to my surprise saying, go for it. In the back of my head, I was like, I'm 19, why are you letting me do this? But her belief in me and continued support is the reason why I'm here today. Thank you, Amatullah. Summer 2020, we ran our first year of Games for Justice within summer programming, within the city school summer programming. And then the next fall, I think we realized that I wanted to try again. So we started planning and recruiting in the spring, and then finally ran our second Games for Justice this summer, now as a standalone program separate from the city school. When I expressed my worries to Amatullah about this decision being extractive, she very calmly explained to me, the goal of the city school is to have young people like you go through our programs and then come out and make their own programs. So we're going to figure out ways to support each other. I know you're not going anywhere. And I remember being really struck by that, that sense of mutual trust. And it was with that sort of beautiful, I don't know, sending off that we began staff training. So this was our beautiful staff team for the summer. I love them, they're great. And when we spent 2 weeks sort of thinking about how we wanted to set up the space and the values that we wanted to use in the space. And this was what we ended with. First, anti-racism and anti-capitalism, because we refuse the conditions given to us. Second, transformative justice, because we demand for change from the root, and we demand that change happens before harm happens to us. And collective care, because we understand that in order for change, we need love, care, stability, community, and kindness to ourselves, each other first and foremost. These three values aren't just random additions to what our work in game design is, because As artists, all of us are intimately familiar with the work of transformative justice. As one of our staff members, Zaria, said, transformative justice is creative. Transformative justice is doing what no white supremacist capitalist industry has ever dared to radically imagine before. It's inherently about creativity and leaving what we've been socialized to learn behind in order to trust in our collective, racially just visions. As someone who was doing all of this planning as a student in a pandemic, there were all sorts of questions I had for myself. Will I facilitate well enough? Have I stepped back for collective leadership to arise? What if no one has fun? But we discussed these hesitations in staff training and landed on a couple of grounding quotes. Change is how we fight the fear of failure in radical imagination. If we cannot change, we cannot engage in the lasting truth that Octavia Butler is talking about, or the wonderful journey of endlessly creating yourself that Fanon talks about. Those quotes were also given by staff members. And finally, the community organizing quote that I often heard as a young person was, everything that I need, I can find within my community. And with this sort of grounding value, we went into full programming in July. So this is just a quick overview of how programming went, a really brief overview. Weeks 1 and 2 were more about community care and building, and sort of building this groundwork of how we wanted to treat each other, how we wanted to be. Weeks 3 and 4, young people actually got into game design groups and started working on their working on their ideas and their concepts for the games. Weeks 5 and 6, they really dove into the creation, the art making, the music making of their projects. And then week 7, we ended with final presentations and publishing out their demos. Besides this overview, there were a couple of components of the program I wanted to highlight. Sorry, I know I'm coming up on time. That's my bad. But we knew that identity development was going to be really important for the youth to engage in, and even for us as staff members to engage in. So racial affinities was a big part of the program. Racial affinities is when we'd go into breakout rooms based on which race we identified with. This happened 3 times. The goal was for both youth and staff to reflect on how their racial identities have developed their lives, which was inquiry, what this means for our role in society, accountability, and how we could use this for our collective care as a group after the program ended, resilience. We also engaged in circle processes around how group work was going to make people feel and how people felt about their own sort of workflow regulation. Some questions included, do you feel you're contributing equally? And if you aren't, what's blocking you from that? And how can we support you in redistributing that work or rescoping the work so that you don't burn out and so you can actually do what you need to do for whatever is happening for you outside of the program. We were also lucky to be visited by 6 speakers that were community nominated and voted on to be able to see who is doing this work in their lives and to inspire ourselves for future pursuits. And then finally, my favorite was youth facilitations, where 2 youth would take 2 hours on Thursdays for a community building exercise. On the right, you can see they made a staff Jeopardy about us by interviewing us, which was very, very fun. And then on the left, there was a show and tell where one of our staff members was kind of showing off their moss garden, which was very cute. We ended this program with 2 game projects. Spice Cartel on the left was about cultural appropriation. Yes, the name is so good. Cultural appropriation and capitalism in the restaurant business and how one restaurant worker fights against the conditions given to them. And Crop Co-op on the right, which was about being a vendor in a queer BIPOC farmers market, organizing with other vendors to fight this white cis man mayor who is trying to gentrify your area. Overall, the experiences I had this summer were so beautiful, and I could not be more grateful for what we got to do together. I'm excited for the reunions we're going to have as a group in the future, and actually staff is working on one final game together even now. So thank you for listening to this presentation, and I'm really excited for the breakout rooms.